Hello, and welcome back to episode 8 of Veridian County, a realistic Pacific Northwest themed city here in City Skylines 2. In today's episode, I want to develop the city of Lemuria's Hilltop District, an area bounded by 2 subway lines, 3 major arterials, and a large hill with tunnels running through it, all bisected by our tram line that we drew out last episode. This master plan district is going to have a distinct architectural style that will come together to form the city's civic center. To accomplish this, we'll begin by carefully selecting the major assets that make up the foundations of our district. Once we've done that, we'll draw out the street layout throughout the district, working to blend 3 conflicting angles: our tram line, major arterial through traffic, public transit, and important connections to a major highway intersection. Lastly, I want to fill out the Hilltop District with French region pack assets to solidify the district's classical hilltop style and set it apart from every other area in the region. But before we dive into the work that we want to do today, let's begin with an episode recap. In the last episode, we created a network of trams throughout the city, with major lines leading from Grand Central through the mountains into future suburban development areas around the waterfront and toward major parks and city development areas. This process included the creation of tram depots to service these routes, setting the foundation for future development in their respective districts, and including enough overhead capacity for future tram network expansion. And most critically, in the last episode, we created the Seoul Industries power plant, powering homes, businesses, and cities throughout the entirety of Veridian County and the broader region of the Pacific Northwest. Through the construction of its solar power plant, nuclear power plant, and support of water treatment facilities and industrial areas, this world-class facility bumped our map's power up to 1.2 gigawatts. Now, we're making a sizable profit from exporting a large percentage of this energy to nearby cities like Victoria across the Canadian border, and port towns across the strait like Port Angeles and Port Townsend. Before I wrap up this recap, I've also done some work in between episodes as I've been unable to record in real life. The most noticeable change is that our entire map is now densely forested. As you may know, I work as an architect in real life, and a couple of my projects recently have been on semi-forested sites, so I've got the joy of learning all about our native tree species here in the Pacific Northwest. Unlike the deciduous heavy canopy back on the East Coast where I grew up, the Pacific Northwest's temperate rainforests and towering mountains are heavily evergreen focused. In the area around me in Seattle, this means we've got a lot of Douglas fir and western red cedars, plus a bunch of hemlocks, alders, and more. These trees don't have direct parallels in game, so instead I forested the area generally with the game's coniferous tree selection, which I feel does a pretty decent job representing the trees around here. I did also sprinkle in some deciduous trees, particularly in low-lying areas, because I think this adds a lot to the character and color of these areas, and Seattle and the Pacific Northwest region does have a whole lot of these, particularly in the alder region of things. In addition to foresting the entire map, I've cleaned up some of the routing of our trains. Now, passenger trains and cargo trains will be more isolated on their tracks. In any instance where we have double tracking, cargo lines remain on one side and passenger trains on the other. The last thing I've been working on quite a lot between episodes is adding detail into our downtown area. Back in episode 4, I laid out many of the most important buildings and plopped our blocks, but this didn't really fill them out. If you compare the Marina District to the Waters District, where more of my work has been, you'll see the difference in the level of detail. The Marina District has many gaps between buildings. The colors are off, and the blocks feel largely incomplete. By comparison, the Waters District feels very cohesive, with lots of parks, public plazas, and recolored buildings. And everything feels intentional, even the otherwise out-of-place buildings. Detailing work like this is a general task that I'm going to work on mostly off-camera, since it really involves just spending days and days doing detailing work with lots of foliage, and things like this work alone has taken me a solid week of work. And as you can see from the density of the parks in the region where I have worked compared to the region where I have not yet worked, you can see that I'm hardly halfway through this major part of downtown. So it's going to be a fair bit more work that's going to happen over the course of the next few episodes, but by the end of it all, we'll have a much more detailed and filled out downtown region with lots of beautiful, wonderful, and office-style parks and plazas for the many workers downtown. Lastly, as you saw in episode 7, I have more storage space now, which means time lapses. I'm going to be using this extra recording space to include more time-lapse footage in my episodes, as many of you have been asking for. To avoid increasing episode lengths too much, this will probably overall mean that less work gets done each episode, but the quality of work and the quality of the episodes will continue to be excellent. Don't you worry. With these updates out of the way, let's get on with the video. In today's episode, I want to redefine Western Heights and develop the entire district. Western Heights was originally envisioned as this area of luxury, where rich housing would be located very close to the city's core, but a little bit further out away from the hustle and bustle of downtown. But looking at the way that this area has shaped out, I really don't think this is a suitable use anymore. Western Heights is bounded by major arterials on 3 sides, with another major arterial running through it, and it's heavily served by public transit. None of these features are things that you would particularly expect to see with a wealthy neighborhood. Since Western Heights doesn't really serve its purpose as a luxury neighborhood, I thought it was time to rethink the purpose of this district. In episode 6, I focused pretty heavily on the concept of having anchor points in given districts. The East Asian Cultural District has the Central City Library, while the Hilltop District has the German Department Store. Greater Grand Central has our Custom Convention Center. The Stadium District will of course have its stadiums, and downtown overall is a pretty bustling neighborhood, so I started to get to thinking about what Western Heights could have as its major accent piece. There were 2 main options that stood out for me as necessary for proximal to downtown. I know that we have a civic center planned for this area slightly north of downtown, but I don't necessarily think that that's an accurate name. It's more closely meant to resemble Seattle Center, where yes, we will still have some public buildings, but it'll be more of a recreational center for the public than any sort of governmental piece. In addition, we also don't have any sort of hospital district within the city, so a civic center and a hospital district were my 2 major options for Western Heights. And I'm thinking right now that a hospital district might be a pretty good fit for somewhere in Uptown or somewhere closer to Nodo. This is going to be a little bit closer to the main city grid of downtown. It's got some more targeted parcels to deal with rather than an entire neighborhood to fill out. And it's a little bit further away from this major tourism hub where we have the stadiums and Greater Grand Central. On the other hand, having a civic center with governmental buildings, pedestrian plazas, and more feels like a great fit for something that is simultaneously tourism focused and a major necessity for our city. Right now, in our downtown area, we don't have any locations for a city hall. While I could have a custom city hall in basically any one of these buildings, the city halls that come with the game tend to be fairly majestic. They're really meant to be used as showpieces within a given city, rather than just being integrated into a downtown with no real special treatment. So I'm going to redraw the boundaries of Western Heights to really focus on these arterial areas and really be bounded in the way that I'm hoping it will be. And this far smaller district feels like a fantastic place to create a brand new civic center for our city. Before we get to drawing out the civic center, let's take a look at some precedent imagery. I want to begin this study, as we often do, by looking at New York City. And New York City itself has a pretty major civic center. It's largely centered around City Hall and City Hall Park. New York City Hall is really just the mayor's office and this kind of historic, fairly small building in the grand context of Manhattan. As you move slightly to the north from City Hall Park, you enter Foley Square and Collect Pond Park, both of which have large city buildings all around them. You've got multiple courthouses from the county Supreme Court, the city's Supreme Court, municipal buildings, and a whole number of other federal, state, and city services all within this major civic center district. This district is defined by a couple things. Firstly, it's got great public transit service, much like most of Manhattan Island to be fair, but there are tons of subway stations all around this district. Secondly, this area has a pretty heavy pedestrian focus. It's not as heavy of a pedestrian focus as some of the civic centers that we'll get to take a look at momentarily, but there are a number of parks that define this area's boundaries and really allow you to bask in the glory of some of these absolutely gorgeous architectural buildings. Which brings me to my third point. Many of the buildings around here, just like the majority of our non-brutalist federal buildings, are absolutely stunning. While the brutalist ones have their own character, it's not personally my style. Many of these buildings are defined by notable steps leading up to a front entry with colonnades, and they've often been renovated in recent years. You can see this one has been renovated to include a green roof. Some of these other ones have probably been renovated to support more modern energy standards, and they really set the character of this district, which looks much more formal and governmental in a sense than many of these other areas of Manhattan. This discussion of architectural styles brings me into the second civic center that I want to take a look at, and that is here in San Francisco. San Francisco Civic Center is fairly similar to New York in that it's defined by its architectural style, its city hall, its parks, pedestrian facilities, transit access, and very specific buildings. You've got services for the federal government, like this federal office building. You've got the city hall, courthouses, large athletic fields, and cultural services like the Asian Art Museum that you see over here. Much like New York City's Civic Center, San Francisco's Civic Center has a number of transit stops that serve the area, whether it's bus, light rail, or BART for heavy rail service. Immediately outside of these transit services is also this fantastic pedestrian mall, which is quite frankly one of the best pedestrian malls that I've seen in an American city. While yes, it does have some cross streets that cut through it, this is a very pedestrianized open facility with lots of green spaces, some park areas, lots of activities, statues, and absolutely gorgeous architecture that flanks both sides of this pedestrian mall. I think this is really something that I would love to replicate in our city, even if it's to a much smaller extent, because we do have an arterial that we plan to run through our major civic center area. Keeping in mind New York City and San Francisco civic centers, the final place that I want to look is, as usual, home for me here in Seattle. Seattle Civic Center is a little bit less defined than New York City Civic Center, or especially not as defined as San Francisco Civic Center, but Seattle's is not particularly shabby in its own right. The Seattle Civic Center is really this campus between Pioneer Square and Interstate 5. Much like San Francisco and New York, this area is served pretty well by transit. You've got light rail stops that serve it, bus stops that serve it, and of course you've got a highway connection directly adjacent to it. Much like these other places, you've got county and city services here, although the federal courthouse is actually a little bit further away from the Civic Center, closer to the Seattle Central Library. Of course, just like Seattle, New York, it's got a number of parks and plazas that run throughout the entire district and really define it. Seattle Civic Center is not as clearly defined as San Francisco's, where the architectural style stands out so vastly. To begin to plan on these ideas here in the city of Lemuria, I think we have to clear out some of these trees. I'm going to clear cut the entirety of Western Heights just so that we get a little bit clearer of an idea of where the boundary of the district is and the grades and topography that we have to deal with over here. And I know this is kind of sad to see, it looks so barren and so naked now. With this area barren, you can really see the extents that we have to work with over here. To plan out this district, I'm going to take a screenshot of it and open it in my image editor, where I want to begin to think about some of the uses that we want to have within this area. If we think about the overall street grid of this district, we think about the boundaries that we have with the arterials all surrounding it, and we have this major arterial that really wants to cut straight through to make its way towards a highway intersection that's going to be located somewhere closer outside of the district. The problem is this arterial is also the best way to create sight lines that lead directly to our most prominent buildings. Let's say we want to have our major city hall somewhere right around here. This means that the arterial is directly in conflict with our city hall. So one of the strategies that we might want to employ is actually bringing this arterial down underground where our city hall intersects with it. The other problem is that we really want to have pedestrian modes in front of our city hall. This means the arterial might actually be going underground fairly soon into the district, rather than continuing all the way through it or bumping into the city hall. I then want to build off of San Francisco Civic Center and really have some sort of a park facility centered around this pedestrian mall. This is probably going to look like the front entrances of some of these buildings, but then I want to have a couple of other buildings on either side of this park area, flanking City Hall and the municipal building. This provides some supportive services. We can identify what these buildings' actual functionality is once they're placed down into the game, but for now I'm thinking that this might be a general layout. I also wanted to do something a little bit special with this lake. There is one asset in particular in game that really has this very compelling C shape, and build that around this lake and create a pretty special type of effect. To wrap up around this arterial, we have a hill over here, so I'm not too worried about the type of buildings that go over there. This might end up being something that's a little bit more forested or screened just with some vegetation. So we really have two more major spots for some buildings over here that we're going to be thinking about our assets fairly clearly. Thinking about our road grid, we're then going to have at least a couple of roads that encircle this whole area, but we are going to want to create at least a few blocks within this district to really make sure that we are maintaining some connections through here and allowing for some buildable area. Speaking of buildable area, I'm thinking that all of these buildings really want to have some sort of special architectural style. I know that this one is a little bit more modern, but I want to have some classical architecture for these main buildings around this plaza. To really emphasize this different architectural style and take advantage of the fact that this is a fairly constrained and well-bounded district, I think I want to actually use French buildings throughout this entire district. This also means that I can use some of the French signature buildings that I don't really have a good place for outside of the city. Lastly, thinking about our public transit connections, we do have subway stops on both ends of this district, and I think that works pretty well. I'm probably going to want to create some sort of pedestrian connection into the City Hall Plaza up there and just into our street grid down here. But we also do have this tram line that snakes its way through Valley Hill before making its way through the district. And I think we want to redirect this tram line to instead run straight in front of City Hall. I think this way it serves our pedestrian facility quite well, and it doesn't intersect with this arterial nearly as much. And with all these facilities thought out, I think we have a good plan to create our district. So let's move it back into the City Skylines 2 game. First step for me is going to be to remove this loop road. While it was helpful for me to understand the boundaries of the hill, I think we're going to be doing a little bit of terraforming of our own around here. This is something that you would reasonably expect for a project as major as a civic center like this. Next up, thinking about the assets that we want to use, I'm thinking I want to use the National Gallery of Art asset as our major landmark building at the end of this arterial. I think, quite frankly, this building is absolutely stunning. It could support the mayor's office and many of the city's major municipal functions all within this one building. To make sure I'm placing this down perfectly parallel to the arterial, I'm drawing out a temporary road at a 90-degree angle and placing the National Gallery of Art asset directly on top of that. Then I'm going to delete that road and use the Move It mod to slide it right back into place. Turning on Just Snap to the sides of the building, let's place our pedestrian road directly in front of this gallery. The next building that I want to place down is the central bank asset. It really matches our architectural style, but the default asset is just far too large for a district like this, and placing it down will force the terrain all around here to conform to its specific heights. To mitigate this, I'm actually going to place down the static ploppable version of this asset. It maintains the architectural style, but it means that I can lift it up and change the terrain and do all this plopping and detailing myself without having to rely on the base game asset. I think it looks just as good and still sets the scene for this district quite nicely. And the last asset I want to place down is the China City Hall. It maintains this fairly white, stone, modern look that runs through it. It's recolorable, it's got some great park and plaza spaces running through here, and while it doesn't have those colonnades in front, I still think it frames out the City Hall and municipal building quite nicely, while providing us the services of an actual City Hall building, because neither of these two other buildings are City Halls. I am going to take the liberty of upgrading this building to have the city planning offices in the back of the building. Yes, it costs me a fair bit in monthly upkeep, but it does have the perk of reducing building leveling cost, and just generally speaking, it adds to the architectural character of the neighborhood, reducing the bulk of the building. The last building that I want to place in is that circular building over here, and that is actually a residential signature building with supposedly European style architecture. I think this building is a great fit for some sort of United Nations building or federal services, and I am totally obsessed with the architecture of this building. I think it is stunning, it's a great addition to the city, and a little bit of Move It will get it in place with the road running right behind it just like that. I've now drawn out Willow Street, which is this road that begins to bridge the terrain gap between these upper level major buildings and this federal building and the arterial down here. But the main benefit of this is that this creates the intersection where we can take our arterial road and we can begin to drop it down. I really want to underground this as quickly as possible. Here is probably fairly reasonable. We can then take this straight on through and bring it out to the arterial right here on the other side. Looks like I went a little bit too high up, so let's redraw that portion of the road. And again, there's a little bit of funkiness on this side as the road begins to come back to the surface, but that's something that we can deal with pretty easily. Just like we did for some of these train station underground segments, let's now take a pedestrian roads and use those to frame the opening. Alright, I've done a little bit of work here. I thought I'd bring you in for a little bit of an update. I've solidified the connection that we have underground for our arterial, and it was a little bit finicky, but I did end up getting it to work. Spruce Street does now run all the way underneath to intersect with Hamilton Street, which will eventually make its way into some sort of big intersection that we got over here to connect up the rest of the city to the highway once again with another major interchange. While I was at it, I also used StarQ's modular service block to kind of create some office zones both within the central bank zone and some extra places within this Gallery of Arts building. Even though this Western Gallery of Arts is a functional building, it only has 50 employees, which I think is just kind of a shame considering how many people would work in a governmental building. So I wanted to raise up the employee count in this district. So we're currently at 414, and we'll see how that shapes up as the district progresses. You can actually see that this area is getting really high usage. The grass crown over here has so many people coming in and out of it. There's 5,700 residents, and they're all gathering inside, outside, all of that. But I do really like the pedestrian traffic that it brings to this district. All of this seems to run pretty well and pretty smoothly right underneath this new pedestrian boulevard that we got that links up to City Hall, Central Bank, and National Gallery of Art. Let's actually go ahead and rename these. The National Gallery of Art is actually going to be the Lemuria City Hall and Municipal Building. The Chinese City Hall is actually going to be the Municipal Court of Lemuria. The Central Bank is actually going to be the Veridian County Administrative Building and Courthouse. The Grass Crown is actually going to be the US Federal Building. The Eastern European Welfare Office is the City of Lemuria's Welfare Office. And lastly, the Emerald Building is actually the Washington State Administrative Building, because state functions will typically be located in the state capital of Olympia, but the Washington State does need to have a little bit of an outpost over here, so I figured we'd take some of that Olympia-style architecture and bring that into the city with this Emerald Building that we got over here. But now that we have the foundation of the district in, let's get on with developing the remainder of Western Heights. I've already started to connect up some of the street grids over here and form a couple of small blocks. With the tram lines paused, let's just delete this tram through line altogether and begin to draw out some roads. Alright, I have got a street grid drawn out, and the topography was one of the most challenging parts of this build. I generally tried to keep the grids under 10%, except for a couple of roads where it gets a little bit steeper than that, but roads like this are around 10%. This little alley is a little bit steeper, so is this one, but generally speaking, we're keeping things fairly consistent. I've done a whole lot of use of retaining walls and pedestrian paths on top with key walls, which just generally creates a pretty clean look if it's done well. And if it's not done well, it's still a pretty good look. I don't really mind a little bump like that. I could shift the wall out, but it's really not worth this effort at the time. I did, since I have this pedestrian pathway drawn in here, plus the assets pedestrian path right there, those two both connected up to the sidewalk down here at the bottom. And you were seeing some people using it as a route to get from this road down here up into the building. So I took this community fire watch tower from the static ploppables and kind of just shifted it into place. And now we effectively have a little elevator tower in the side of this retaining wall, just to get you up the hill a little bit faster without having to walk all the way around. I placed in a couple of parking garages because I was noticing that our streets around here are getting totally full of parking. I think I want to place one more in this area, but I do want it to be fairly close to this building because that's what's generating a lot of the traffic for us right now. Right about there. And that should fill up quite nicely for us. It blends this corner pretty well. It doesn't look too out of place. I can even take this recolor scheme and paste that right into here. But now that we have our street grid drawn on, we can begin to reconnect our tram lines. And you may have been able to tell, but I have already started to consider that. Over here, we have a little bit of a super intersection where the tram line can sneak around it. Just because the parking garage was right there, I shifted Amity Street over a little bit, but the tram line can still continue its way through this intersection. So let's draw that in as road upgrade, and it looks just like that. I quite like it. Then we can begin to make our way up Willow Street, where this pedestrian entry is. and that'll connect our line over here into the pedestrian road. Nice and gorgeous. We'll have to have a stop right in the middle over here for sure. Then there's this little bit of a loop up and around Valley Hill that we got over here. On this side, it feels pretty fine connecting into Spring Street via this roundabout. But on the other side, I think we need to come right into here into this Larkspur Ivy intersection. Constant slope and grounding mode on. I can take this and draw it right up to the existing grade and maybe a retaining wall on this side over here. Now, just to simply and easily route into pedestrian road over there, let's just bring it up this L around the back of the central bank, and we've got our connections drawn in. You'll see the routing is taking it right through here as it's intended to do. Let's add a couple of stops into this district. Let's place a couple mid-block over here, right behind the parking garage. And then let's place these two right in front of the main city hall. And lastly, since I don't want to place any right on this little stretch over here, let's move it ever so slightly down this road, right about there. And I don't want the trams to take up that entire block, so let's just add a mid-block break, just like that. Take our tram tool and route it through these new stops. And we're golden. Absolutely wonderful. Now that our street grid is drawn in and our tram is reconnected, it's time to move on to placing down our assets. In the Western Heights district where our Civic Center is, as I discussed earlier in the episode, I'm thinking that we want to use some French assets in this area. The thought is that this will create a really unique architectural character within the area, it'll set it apart, and it'll allow us to establish some pretty good boundaries for the area. The main reason why you haven't seen me use very many French assets in the rest of the city is because they are not recolorable. Right now, I believe I have 2 French assets in the entire city. We've got this one building here over on, another Hawthorne Street? City Skylines 2, you're so creative with your names. Gosh. Yeah, we have a singular French asset building right over here, and I do have the absolutely gorgeous French college over here. This is a stunning asset, and I do think it has a lot of character to it besides the fact that the back is all white, but the front of this building is just stunning. But your typical French assets are generally not really recolorable, so I think it's best that they stay contained, and this district is already pretty white, a little bit of gray, so I think I should be able to place these in here fairly well. Now that we actually have all this purchased, I think I'm going to do something crazy, I know. I might try to manually zone all of this in, and now let's do the dangerous thing and resume. I have super fast building and leveling, so everything should spawn in really quickly and just really quickly pop up. Let's see how good or how bad this concept looks right before my very eyes. This is dangerous. This is scary. Is that it? Is it done? Well, I don't like it. It's nowhere near as dense as I would have liked. These blocks are way too big. Definitely need some alleys to differentiate them. The row houses are way too uniform. There is some weird, like, these architectural styles are completely different. I do really like how this faces this road. Like, I love this framing right here. This is working really well, and I think this right here speaks to the potential of this neighborhood. I really like how this is working, but I really rather strongly dislike how the rest of everything's zoned out. So I get the feeling that we're going to end up placing basically all of this in manually, which is really unfortunate. But I am going to give it another go in some of these areas where I think the blocks are just too big. But again, City Skylines' zoning grid is just totally messing this up. You can see what the problem is. Right here, it would be great if all of these buildings filled in and we had a cohesive block, because there's clearly room to put buildings in here. What City Skylines does is it counts this section as part of this building, so since this building spawned in, nothing's going to grow there. Same with over here, building spawned in there, so nothing's going to grow in here, nor in this area right there. So suddenly we have this really kind of awful block. So unfortunately, I think I'm going to probably clear the slate on most things in this district and start over, but I'm glad that our concept is working out, and I'll be back with you once we have a little bit more. All right, I'm just 2 blocks in, and this is taking a little bit of time, but I think this is definitely worth it. I've got 2 different colors over here. I've got kind of this more tan light stone color, and I've got this bright white color, and I think both of them work pretty well in the context of this district. I mean, just look at this. Look at this shot. I think from above it stands out from the rest of the city, but I think in a good way. It doesn't really break my immersion from the city. It just feels like it's a totally different quarter of the city. I'm gonna need to work on how these row houses move between architectural styles and whether I even want to have all of these over here. I don't think I do, but I do think having some blocks like this is going to be a worthwhile investment of our time. I'm still gonna put my time into it and we'll see how well it goes. Alright, welcome back from a time lapse where I definitely went a little bit overboard. I got carried away just filling out this entire district, but boy did I have a lot of fun while doing it. We are, as you can tell, pre-detailing, and I know this episode is running a little bit long, but it's really important to me that we fill out this entire district. As you saw, for the most part, this is some pretty typical French zoning. We got some row houses, some mixed-use housing, a lot of office buildings. I placed down a whole bunch of our signature buildings wherever we can. So we have some mixed housing, we have some offices, we have some commercial, more offices, and so on. But I also placed down a whole bunch of our service buildings, and this is where things get a little bit fun. First off, over here is our new federal courthouse. So we didn't really have a place for a federal courthouse within this main area. I thought that this administrative building might serve as that purpose, but this is really not big enough for a full federal courthouse, so it's really serving as the administrative building. So instead, I took this high school and this police station from the French asset pack, and I just smushed them into each other and created this kind of two-winged building with a really cool clock tower style frontage. Pretty nice presence on all the other sides. It feels a little bit brutalist, a little bit more than it does French, which will really help us as we transition our districts in this area. And I placed down a couple of parks out front. We're gonna have to get a little bit more into this as we do the landscaping and detailing momentarily, but this is a pretty good start for now on our federal courthouse. I wasn't sure where we'd put this since we ran out of space over here. I thought it might end up going somewhere else in downtown, but I just saw a really good opportunity with these French service buildings. We've also got another transformer substation for the district over here, the French Asset Pack's version of that. Since we're right next to the highway, I thought I could squeeze that in right over here. And the clearance is a little bit tight as it comes over the subway line, but the train makes it under there totally fine, so I think that's okay. We've also got an elementary school up here, flanked by a couple of office buildings, which I think just creates a kind of special little multi-sided building over here. I don't mind it all too much. And from the back side, it doesn't look too bad. I don't love how all of these assets just have white on the back of them or on the sides of them. I wish there was a little bit of texture on there, but you know what, honestly, it's fine. It helps that it's symmetrical like this, and it helps that it's leading up to this already pretty gray white building over here. Then around the back of the City Hall building, we've got a firehouse. I stripped a whole bunch of the components of this firehouse and I upgraded with everything possible. And it kind of ends up looking a little bit like a mayor's mansion of some sorts. I don't really think that that's the purpose of it, and I'm not actually sure what we want this to be considered as lore-wise, but I think it just kind of works and fits on these city capitol grounds, city civic hall grounds and all. Over on this side by the subway tracks, I did manage to squeeze in a medical building and another signature building over here. Plus we've got a whole bunch of parking garages scattered throughout the district, as you saw earlier. Speaking of parking garages, we got a couple of kind of fun things that I did over here. First off, since this whole Capitol grounds area is elevated up, I kind of took the assumption that if this area was all flat, then they might have taken the opportunity to build an entire parking garage underneath this. Just a single level, maybe right at ground level or very slightly underneath it. But we've now got a fairly extensive parking garage right underneath this whole Capitol grounds area. You can kind of see it in this underground view, and you can see that it's getting really high usage. One of the main reasons why I'm providing so much parking here is because, while yes, this is our federal building, as I showed you earlier, it does have 6,000 residents, and those residents are going to need a way to get around. Even if most of them don't have a car, that's still a very large amount of people, hundreds if not 1,000 people who have a car, so we got to provide a bunch of spaces in this district. The other parking lot that I've got is a somewhat new Star Q asset. It's an underground parking block. So this is a service block which says 2,200 stalls, but it really should be 1,200 stalls. But it's basically a whole lot of parking. You place it down and that's an entrance for vehicles and pedestrians, as you saw going in there. You can add on extra entrances, so I put one inside of this shack. You can also set up pedestrian exits, so I put a couple pedestrian gates over here under both of these. Then, just like we did over on the other side by the City Hall, I sunk down a couple of fire watch towers to effectively look like little elevator penthouses, and I put a couple taxi garages over top of these to make it look like the cars are actually pulling in and out of proper garages for this parking, rather than just driving into the hill or driving into the middle of nowhere. I think this looks okay for now, but it's really going to be the landscaping and detailing that solidify this entire area and make it actually feel like a real place to be lived in. The last thing that I did that's a little bit unique, besides placing down a whole bunch of these little parks, pocket parks here and there, just as placeholders. Oh, there's a fire, there's a fire, there's a fire. Who's coming for it? And it's a fire headquarters coming all the way from the Marina District. Beedoo. Anyway, last thing I did that was kind of unique is in front of this federal building, we had this pond previously. And once I had drawn everything in around here, it kind of just looked sad, to be honest. So I decided to buff it up a little bit. I instead turned it into a reservoir. So I framed it in on all sides with quay walls, drew in a pedestrian path over here behind these row houses, which kind of looks like really nice. It works behind these row houses. It's really well used just because of how much traffic this federal building is getting. It connects up the tram stops over here to that federal building pretty efficiently and provides a parallel connection from the fairly busy Mosswood Street. And here in this reservoir, I decided to add in a couple of pumping stations. Again, just like the parking area buildings that we used over here, these are just some more static ploppable buildings. So they're not functional or anything, but they just look kind of cool. So I placed those down over here. You tend to see a pumping station in many of the modern reservoirs just to make sure everything's filtered out and to add it into the city grid. So I just put this over here, bumped up against the quay wall, and I think that just adds to the framing of this federal building pretty well, pretty effectively. Finally, I added a whole bunch of parking over here underneath the subway tracks that we had running over here, which pretty much resembles the subway tracks that we have running in the highway area downtown, as I showed you previously. These parking areas under the subway tracks work fairly effectively and somewhat match the condition in the cities that we're trying to replicate and taking inspiration from. With all that out of the way, it's time to move on to landscaping and detailing, and in the interest of time in this episode, I may keep this a little bit more brief on the time-lapse edge, but I'll be sure to come back with you once we're all done. And landscaping and detailing is done. That means this entire district of Western Heights has been completed. And quite honestly, I'm really happy with it. I love how this district has turned out, and recently I've been playing with the daytime actually running, and then once it hits nighttime, then I'll use my little override from Time and Weather Anarchy. I really love how the sun effects impact the visuals of the game. I love how the city looks, especially during golden hour like this. I mean, look at this, y'all. Can you believe that we've been creating this together? I love it. You can see, although I didn't cover the entire detailing in the time-lapse, you'll see that a lot of it focused just on foresting up the entire area, filling in all the gaps. So now we have proper detailing around these parks that we got in front of buildings, in the center plaza. Our center plaza has some really nice tile surfaces and even some grass and plant surfaces running down the center of the streets. You saw that we worked on the park in front of the federal building as well, making sure that it's all staying nice and symmetrical besides this little corner over here. I'm starting to experiment with real vision decals as well. I kind of really like it. It's landscaping detailing is really just all about the small touches, like putting bushes in here instead of just having exposed grass, filling in this forested area and making sure there's some nice texturing going underneath it rather than it just being plain. Making sure that all the grass that we do have is a nice texture rather than something that's a little bit more boring. And creating the pedestrian plazas that really foundationally shape the experience of people who are living and walking around the city. Landscaping and detailing always takes a long time, but it's really one of the most important steps to make sure that your city feels realistic. You're not going to get these brick sidewalks and these stair-step plazas with trees and benches, all of that. You're not going to get that otherwise. It's going to feel a lot more disjointed until you start to do your surface work and you start to do your foliage work to really create the sense of symmetry between the two of these. You're not going to get that sense of place, like this little pocket park sense with meal vendors. You're not going to get that until you do some of this manual detailing. So I really think manual detailing is such an important part of the work that we do in here, but it helps out so much. I'm really happy with how this district is turning out. One of the fun things that I did, I gotta mention this, one of the fun things I did is I actually created individual turn pockets in this road for this parking garage. Larkspur Street has been handling things pretty well. It's still getting pretty high traffic volume, but they're just turning into here fairly smoothly. On the other hand, Mosswood Street is struggling a little bit with all of the traffic from this underground parking lot. I mean, look how thick these lines are. This is some of the thickest lines that I've ever seen just to fill up these 2,000 spots. It's supposed to be 1,000, but I think the capacity upgrade has a bug right now where it adds double. Either way, we were getting so many people turning into here that I actually node creation in here. So we have a 2-lane road right at the intersection, but then we switched to 3-lane asymmetric roads for both of these parts in opposite directions. Then I used some net lanes and some decals just to create these custom road markings in here. And I used the Traffic Mod's lane connector tool to basically make sure that these turning lanes are dead ends. So people aren't going to come in there just for normal traffic flow. They're only going to use this if they really want to get into the parking garage and they're having some trouble queuing. I've seen it work fairly effectively, especially on the westbound side over here, turning right into the parking garage. I've seen a lot of queuing up here, and that's helped prevent some traffic backups that extended past into this intersection. Especially since we've also got this medical center over here, you see a lot of ambulances spawning and despawning from this area since this medical center doesn't actually have its own parking lot. It just all spawns and despawns right in the street, which, for better or for worse, I think it's fine. But that does add a little even more traffic flow and complications to this little section of the road here. So by creating these turning panels, you can reduce some of that blockage that we got in this area. All in all, I'm really enjoying how the Civic Center is turning out, and with the landscaping and detailing done, there's only one thing left to do in this episode, and that's to take us out with our outro and cinematics. What in the world? It's 3 p.m. and it's pitch black out? What is this, Finland? We here in the Pacific Northwest get dark at 4 p.m., not 3 p.m. Goodness. This is where time and anarchy comes in. You can just set it to daylight flashbang yourself, but then you can actually see what's going on in the game. Anyway, I'm really enjoying these cinematics, I'm really enjoying these episodes, and I hope you are too. I'm very proud of how Western Heights has turned out. I'm having a lot of fun creating these episodes and using them kind of as an opportunity to deep dive into elements of urban planning and city design that I don't really get to spend a lot of time in, generally speaking. I don't spend a lot of time engaging with civic centers in my cities or even learning about them, so getting to design one in-game gives me the chance to research them around the world, figure out places that I might want to visit in the future, and spend more time about and study in real life. I know that I want to study New York City Civic Center even more in the future, even though I've spent a good amount of time there. I feel like there is so much to learn from New York City Civic Center, and so much amazing architecture there that I would have a total joy spending time around a little bit more than just passing through it on the way to some of my favorite restaurants in New York City. I do really think that Western Heights is kind of the crown jewel of the city of Lemuria right now. Literally, it's shaped like a diamond if you look at it. You got the two shallower ends and the steeper ends on both sides. Western Heights is kind of this crown jewel of the city of Lemuria. It's absolutely gorgeous architecturally. It's very distinct in a way that won't be replicated anywhere else in the city. Nowhere else in the city will we have huge rows of French buildings just like this on narrow streets, nor will we have buildings as densely trafficked as this federal building over here. All of this is really unique, and I appreciate the district for that and me having that chance to create something so special. Now that our cinematics are done, the district is done, and everything is all complete, that is all that I've got for you this video. I know it was a little bit longer than usual, so I thank you all for watching to this point if you have done so. I'm really looking forward to the next video, and I hope you are too. Until the next one, thank you for watching, and bye-bye!